Justin. I think it looks like he is. Olivia, we can't hear Justin.
There we go. How's that? Perfect.
Much better.
Okay.
We didn't know when we were supposed to start.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I'll start again. Good
Okay.
afternoon. My name is Mark Linnell, and I am with Salt Lake County Aging and Adult Services, the host agency for this year's Utah Elder Justice Conference. I want to welcome you to the Conversations and Challenging Behaviors in Dementia Care, Which Part is Mine session, which we are recording for later viewing. As an attendee of this session, you will only be able to see the presenter and yourself. All other attendees are hidden from your view. You can click on the lower right side of the screen to see the panelists. Please ask any questions you have through the Q&A, which is also located on the bottom of your right screen, and we will be holding questions until the end of the presentation. I will now turn the time over to our presenters who will introduce themselves.
Welcome. My name is Nancy Madsen, and I am the Utah Caregiver Support Program Manager for the Division of Aging and Adult Services. I'm retiring at the end of this month, and my successor is...
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Netterostic.
And she is the new program manager. So we're excited to be here with you today and talk about a subject that both of us are very passionate about. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. There. Okay. So as Mark mentioned, the title of our, or Mark, whoever it was, mentioned that the title of our session is Conversations and Challenging Behaviors in Dementia Care. Which part is mine? We have a couple of objectives for this session. We hope that the things that you'll learn today will bring more peace to relationships and communication with persons experiencing cognitive impairment of any level or dementia, and that you'll be able to discover new ways to communicate and de-escalate common dementia expressions.
Okay, so I think it's important for us to first start talking about what actually dementia is. And so dementia is a syndrome. It's actually a term that's used to describe challenges in several different areas of the brain that are affected. So memory, language, vision, decision-making, problem solving, and of course, challenges and changes in personality. There are actually many types of dementia, and of course, each one is going to come with its own characteristic symptoms. It's very helpful to learn about each of those specific types of dementia, specifically if you know you're working with somebody with FTD or vascular dementia. It's important to know about that specific type of dementia. But for today and in general, we're just gonna review these as the basic challenges that everybody can expect to deal with when it comes to dementia. It's also important to know that individuals with dementia are challenged in the way that they're thinking. They can no longer think the same way that folks without dementia can, or the way that they used to. They'll start to see the world in a slightly different way than before. And their ability to express their thoughts is going to be a challenge for them as well now because of their dementia diagnosis. So why do individuals with dementia have challenges in these areas? Well, it's because of this. It's because of what you're seeing on your screen now. So we wanted to show you exactly what happens in the brain of someone with dementia. You can see here the differences between someone with Alzheimer's disease and someone without Alzheimer's disease, specifically and especially in the areas outlined there in the language and memory centers of the brain. So as we look at the degeneration and atrophy of the brain that's caused by dementia, we realize that it is quite amazing that the person with dementia is doing as well as they are. They're actually doing the absolute best they can in making sense of the world around them, in processing information, picking up on cues in their environment to determine how to function and what to do. Looking at these images, it's honestly no wonder that they will have challenges with memory, language, vision, decision-making, problem-solving, and personality. So if we know someone with dementia, if their brain looks like this, the right side of the image there, and that they're going to have challenges with memory, we wouldn't want to quiz them, for example, on who we are or challenge their belief in their age or where they live. If we know someone has a deficit in the area of language, then we would want to be more understanding with them. If they make a mistake using the wrong word, or they take a little bit longer to process a sentence that we just said to them. So, other examples, vision. If we know someone has a deficit with vision, we would want to provide additional cues to their environment to help them out. With decision making, we'd want to offer simple choices. Problem solving, we'd want to break a task down into small, manageable steps. So it's really about how to help them to be more successful. When we wanted to review these slides because, to be honest, you can't really get into talking about communication or behavioral expressions without first understanding what's actually causing the issue. So for example, if I were to walk into a room that any of you are in, and I was walking on crutches and I had my leg in a cast, because you're all amazing, wonderful individuals, you can see that I have a deficit, and you might offer to hold a door for me or carry some of my items for me or whatever it might be, to be helpful, because you can tell that I have a challenge in that area. With folks with dementia, when we're working with them, we don't always see that challenge, and it's not always obvious to us. And so it's not as if they walk around with gauze wrapped around their heads, indicating this is where my deficit is, this is where I'm having trouble, this is where my challenge is. And so we tend to forget, pun intended, sorry, that is an issue for folks, and that we might need to provide additional support to them. So it really all boils down to an understanding of the challenges that a person with dementia is actually dealing with, and then having empathy so that we can try to find ways to support them. And then after that, it's just being creative and problem solving. So if I can boil anything down to that, it's really that, just understanding the disease process, understanding those challenges, providing empathy, and being creative in trying to support that individual. And that's where the rest of our discussion is to come into place, is how to be supportive. So I want you please to just remember, a person with cognitive impairment is not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And it might be helpful, instead of focusing frustrations, because we will all experience frustrations as we're working through this dementia journey with someone. Instead of focusing your frustrations on that individual, try focusing it on the disease process itself. And it's helpful, of course, to acknowledge with that individual and share in their frustration and be on their side. That can absolutely help as well.
So what we would like you to do is a simple exercise before we launch into talking about communication tips and ways to deal with behavioral expressions. So I'd like each one of you individually to think of an individual that you know or that you have a relationship with memory loss. Someone with whom maybe you struggle communicating, or who might be exhibiting challenging behavioral expressions. And I want you to think about how and why you might struggle with them. And then throughout this presentation, ask yourself, which methods that we present to you today can I use to improve communication with this person? And what can I pay attention to in order to address the unmet needs in this person to reduce the challenging behaviors? So first, we will talk about communication tips. And our first one is approaching slowly and from the front. The second concept of that is maintaining eye contact at eye level. So if we are approaching someone with dementia or cognitive impairment, if we approach slowly and from the front, they can see us and we're not being abrupt about it. And then as we get closer to them and we move to the side and maybe take their hand, that is reassuring. Always maintaining eye contact at eye level during that time. That is very respectful and non-threatening, much better than if we're standing over them if they're seated. And as you're approaching, let them know who you are, much as you would for a person who might have low vision. You know, hi, Grandma, it's Melanie. And it allows them to not have to go through a long process of trying to connect your name and your face, all of that together. Because each one of us, as we grow older anyway, our processing speed slows down. That doesn't mean that we're not smart, that we don't know, but we process a little bit slower. Well, then you add cognitive impairment or dementia. Let's help them be successful in that way in knowing who we are. And that gives them a heads up to instead of trying to figure this out on their own. And there may come a time when they don't know your name with your face, or they're unable to articulate that or process it. And so it's really nice if we approach slowly from the front, smile on our face, maintain that eye contact level, and let them know who we are.
So thinking back to our slides showing the deterioration and atrophy that's happening in the brain, and then knowing that language is going to be affected, we can absolutely expect that an individual with dementia is going to have challenges with speaking and understanding words, and that's okay. So knowing that's going to happen, how then do we work with that, and how do we help that individual? So it's interesting, a person with dementia will actually respond to your emotion far better than your words and your nonverbal communication, because nonverbal communication is actually the first language that any of us ever learn. So think of whenever you've talked with or worked with an infant or a toddler, and you use your facial expressions and your body language and your joyful tone of voice to express a feeling to that individual. Even though they don't know the words that you're saying, and they haven't learned those words and don't know what it means, they can understand the emotion that you're expressing, and they can follow along with that. So the same thing with individuals with dementia, because our nonverbal communication is the first language that any of us understand. It's intrinsic in what we know, and we can pick up on those cues and process that information a lot easier than the spoken word. So individuals with dementia in the mid to late stages will be able to actually understand that a lot better than any type of spoken word, and then vice versa. We can use the cues that individual is giving to us to understand what they're trying to say. So an example I might have is a number of years ago when I was traveling to one of my memory care communities in Indiana. I walked into the room and immediately my eyes went to this lovely lady on the couch as she's just kind of people watching. And I approached her and I said, "Hi, how are you today? It's good to see you." And she looked at me and had the most beautiful smile on her face and the kindest eyes. And she said, "I hate you." And it was the cutest thing, but really I understood. I mean, her body language was saying something other than hate, but in that moment, that's the word that her brain came up with, and she was able to speak and get out. And I, of course, didn't become offended. I didn't focus exactly on the words, but I focused on the feeling and what she was expressing with her nonverbal communication. So that's just an example. And frustrations absolutely can happen when we're communicating with folks with dementia. So it's important to understand that to them, it might be a brand new conversation when we've heard it over and over again. They might have asked that question over and over again, but to them, it might be the first time. And so reminding ourselves of that challenge that they're dealing with, and that's going to happen, and that's okay. So just like a person with dementia will be better able to process our nonverbal cues, as I said, we can use the same to understand what they're trying to express. So another example would be, maybe an individual is saying no as far as they're not feeling any pain, they're not experiencing any pain, but their body language might tell us a little different. They might have furrowed brows, they might be, favoring a part of their body as they're walking. And we can take that as better information than just the words that they're using. Or maybe they need to use the restroom, and we might ask them that, and we might get a no, but we can tell the way they're talking or the way they're fidgeting, they might need to make a visit to the restroom. And so knowing that will actually help quite a bit in how we communicate.
One of the next concepts that is important is to be positive and not argue or criticize. It's important to remember that a person with cognitive impairment or dementia, that their reality is often a mix of the past and the present, sometimes something that they've seen on TV, sometimes it's their dreams. And what we want to do is meet them where they are in their reality, not our own. Trying to reason with someone who has lost reasoning power can lead to confrontation, and it leads to frustration for both of you. And what happens when that occurs is that trust goes away, and they begin to associate you with someone that they can't trust. And then down the road, that comes into possibly a behavioral expression that comes out if they're not able to articulate those things with you. Another thing is validating their feelings and responding again to the emotions behind the statement. So we've got a little clip on here that a little validation goes a long way, regardless of if they're out in left field with it. Validate those feelings. Those are very real to them, and that allows you to connect with them. The emotion is real to them, and that's what is most important. So if they say, for example, I want to go home, and let's say they're living in an assisted living facility, or they're living in your home now, and instead of their own home that they've lived in for the past 50 years, trying to take that conversation and distract it a little is good. And look for the meaning behind the words. What is home? What does home feel like to them? What's missing right now that they want to go home? Is it security? Is it safety? Is it that feeling of mom or a spouse that is no longer there? It's not, this is where we get into trouble if we argue and we say, no, mom, this is where you live now. Dad died. That doesn't work. That will promote a behavioral expression, possibly of uncontrollable tears, because they're hearing it again for the first time to them. They don't have that memory of what has happened before. So remember, it's not about what's right. It's about coming into their world and looking for the feeling and the emotion that's behind what they're saying.
It's also helpful to ask questions that offer a yes or no response rather than open-ended questions where they have to fill in an entire sentence or paragraph. That can be challenging for somebody who has difficulty processing information and formulating a response. And so a simpler question where they can just answer yes or no, and asking simpler questions or making simpler statements versus compound sentences or giving multiple instructions at once. That gives them, and then of course you want to give them the opportunity to process that information, take their time to make sense of what they're just heard, and then formulate a response. So we don't want to rush them as well. So an example would be, well, nobody wants, I was just saying, nobody wants to be told no all the time. So you want to be able to ask them, for their opinion, offer choices versus just giving them whatever it is they're going to wear that day or something like that. When you're helping a person with dementia with their activities of daily living, that's the time where we tend to see the most behavioral expressions. And it's because that's a confusing time. It's overwhelming. The tasks that we're asking them to engage in are very complex. So we want to be able to break that down as well into simple steps. And so an example, when you're brushing your teeth, it might be, I'll put toothpaste on the toothbrush for you and hand you that toothbrush and then cue you to brush your teeth, give you, and kind of guide you through that process versus just expect you to go into the bathroom and brush your teeth on your own, where that's a little bit more overwhelming and a little bit more confusing. And so another example of, simpler suggestions or simpler offerings, instead of offering or asking the question, what would you like to eat for breakfast? That's tough. That's a big open-ended question, and there could be any number of things and to think about, and that takes a lot of processing time. And so maybe I'll offer some simple choices, such as, would you like orange juice or apple juice? Would you like coffee or water? Would you like, eggs or toast? And so when you make those simple suggestions, of course, knowing what their preferences usually are in the routine, that makes it a lot easier for them. And of course, it's also important to be able to provide those verbal, physical, and tactile cues for that individual. So especially when working with them, doing their activities of daily living, giving a shower, helping them to the restroom, it's important to share with them what you're doing as you're going. So there's no surprise. I'm gonna, wash the shampoo out of your hair now, something along those lines. It's also helpful to provide not only that verbal cue as an example that I just gave, but also any physical cues you can. If you're asking them to come sit down next to you, maybe pat the chair, pull the chair out, make an example of doing that so they can pick up on that cue that you might want them to sit there next to you.
I think one of the things, if I could tag onto that Kate said, the verbal understanding is one of the first things to go, but as we said on a slide earlier, there's so much more that is being done with our body language and with nonverbal cues that are going on. All of us respond to nonverbal cues more than we even think we do. And so being able to not just rely on language and they don't understand, let's be more conscious about the nonverbal cues that we can give.
Yep, absolutely.
So the next point, plan ahead, don't rush. It provides for less stress for them, for less stress for you. So let's use an example of it's time to shower your loved one and they need your assistance. And so if we can plan ahead by getting their pajamas out, let's say they're showering before they go to bed, getting their pajamas out, laying them on the bed, and beginning to get the shower on and get that bathroom started to be more heated up, get the moisture in there so that we're not stripping off all the clothes and going into a cold bathroom. And often in later stages, they don't want everything off at once. And so there's tips and tricks for using a shower chair in the bathroom and just disrobing one part of the body at a time. Another idea that a colleague shared with me that she used to do with a resident in a facility that she was working at was she had a woman that was struggling with not wanting to go into the shower. But yet she was a prolific knitter and crocheter. And so every night my colleague would take a bag home that had a ball of yarn in it and she would completely undo it And then when it was time to shower this or to bathe this woman, and so it was more of a spit bath type thing, she would sit her in a chair and hand her that bag of yarn, and she would roll that yarn. She had her hands busy. And so then my colleague was able to wash her hair and wash her body, things like that. So there's some things that we can do if we're willing to take that time. The same is true with appointments. Make sure that if at all possible, you're setting healthcare appointments or any other kind of appointments at a time of day that works for them, when they're more alert, when you're feeling better. If we save things for the end of the day, we're all tired, we're all stressed by that point. And so plan for success for both you and for your loved one. Another thing is that's very helpful is to keep a routine. Don't change that routine constantly. That adds to the confusion. So if you can have a regular ritual before going to bed and then after getting into bed, or a regular ritual that you do in the morning, same time of day for meals, sleep-wake cycle for as long as that will work, and a ritual that includes activity at a time when they are most alert or their body is feeling better. All of us need fresh air. All of us need to get outside and somewhat of exercise. And we're coming into those spring and summer months right now that it's always helpful to get outdoors. It makes us feel better. It helps them feel better. And so setting up a routine that you can stick to is very helpful.
Absolutely. Again, if you think back to that image of a person with dementia's brain and the atrophy and the challenges that you could see throughout the entire brain, that makes sense then as to why it's difficult for them to process information, any type of information coming in, whether it be verbal information, cues, environmental cues, background noise, anything like that. So we want to be mindful of that and understand that it can be extremely overwhelming for a brain that's challenged already to have to then determine how to process all this information coming in. So we want to be very mindful of that. We want to minimize distractions. We want to watch, background noise, multiple conversations going on in the room, noise from the television or the radio or something along those lines, because it's very challenging for them to understand what am I supposed to focus on, and it can be easily overwhelming, which then can lead to frustration and anxiety on their part. It's also important when an individual with dementia begin to lose the ability to communicate, and we tend to see this in mid and especially late stages, familiar touch can be very calming to them. So as we see that progression, touch is more important, and it actually expresses comfort, reassurance, helps them to feel safe and loved, as it does for all of us. Touch is very important for any of us, and it's no different than for a person with dementia. It's also important, of course, above all, to reassure that individual and treat them with dignity and respect, and not only in the words, in your words and actions, but your tone of voice, and how you work with them, how you touch them, and how you move around them. It's important, as Nancy mentioned, to focus on feelings, not just the task at hand. And so instead of rushing through an activity with them, to really take your time, understanding that going slower gives them a better amount of time to process that information and feel comfortable with what's happening. And as I said earlier, it really all boils down to how you would want to be treated as a person, with, of course, basic empathy, respect, dignity, etc. And so a person with dementia is really no different, and they absolutely know the difference between someone who is treating them well and someone who is not.
So now we're going to move into the second part of our presentation, and we're going to talk about addressing behavioral expressions and unmet needs. Remembering that as verbal ability begins to diminish in a person with cognitive impairment or a type of dementia, that this is their way of communicating. Just as Kate said earlier, how babies and toddlers, respond. That's our first language when we were small, and how we respond to each other when we can't communicate. So keep that in mind, and we'll talk about how you can pick up on this. So this is a rhetorical question, but look at these 3 photos of 3 different individuals with very different expressions that they have. Without even them being verbal about it, I think each one of us can see in the woman with the scarf, who is on my left, that maybe there's fear or worry. Maybe the woman to the right that has a turquoise top, maybe she is upset or is anxious about something. And the gentleman down at the bottom might be feeling frustration, aggression. He might be angry about something. So again, going back to what we had said earlier, and I love this phrase, if we can all just emblazon it on us, that they are not trying to be difficult. They're having a hard time. And so whenever we are individually, all of us are having a hard time, that's not the time that we want somebody being frustrated with us. We want help. And so they are doing the very best they can with the neurons in their brain that don't connect on a direct path anymore. So they're trying to find their way around through the backcountry roads, knowing that that place is out there, or that word is out there, or just trying to make sense of communication. And so we sometimes will see these behavioral expressions. I'll give you a common one that we see, and that has to, that where we might see a behavioral expression, and that has to do with the use of the bathroom. As someone loses their cognitive ability and goes a little bit farther into dementia, oftentimes, even if they've lived in the same house for 30 years, they don't remember where the bathroom is. Or if that bathroom door is closed, to them, they don't see what's on the other side anymore. So they don't know there's a toilet in there. So they may begin to try and be resourceful and use the clothes hamper or use the closet or something. And so if we can help them be successful instead of being frustrated that they're trying to be resourceful or they're just doing this, maybe at the earlier stages, we could put a picture of a toilet on the outside of the bathroom door if it's closed. Later on, maybe we open the bathroom door and that's enough. Later on, maybe we need to take that bathroom door off completely. Anything that we can do to set them up for success. We can consider a toileting schedule so that every few hours we're taking them to the bathroom and then there's less accidents. And then we can remove the clothes hamper, or rearrange the clothing in the closet, put down a waterproof something, on the bottom. There's all kinds of ways that we can be creative to help them be successful, because remember, they can't figure it out anymore. They're doing the best that they can.
And I think this is probably a great time to pause. You may be wondering, why do Nancy and I keep saying behavioral expression? That's a choice. That's an absolute choice, because I think when we just say someone's exhibiting a behavior or someone has a behavior, that has a very negative connotation to it. If you think of the difference, if you really process and think of the difference between behavior and behavioral expression, behavior really has that negative connotation. It can actually put a label on that individual that then kind of frames how we work with that person. Whereas behavioral expression actually reframes it into a more positive aspect, because we realize just because that individual can't communicate with us verbally or can't express their frustrations or what they're dealing with verbally, they can tell us through their actions. And that's what we mean by behavioral expression, that any type of action along those lines is their maybe they're remaining a way to express to us that they're having trouble, that they need help in some way. So I encourage you also to reframe it that way for you, your family members, your team members, whoever it is that you're working with. It's important to try to, when you're trying to determine what's going on with this behavioral expression, to determine the trigger or what's causing this behavioral expression. And so when does it happen is an important aspect to look at. Time of day of the week, those kinds of things can really help to narrow down what is causing this behavioral expression, and then how we can go about fixing that. So you may want to keep a journal. What I used to do in my years in long-term care, when I was challenged with determining what was causing a behavioral expression, is I would actually write a paper clock, and just kind of, draw a clock on a piece of paper and indicate on that clock when I was seeing those behavioral expressions from that person. And if I saw a cluster of, during a specific hour or a 2-hour time frame, then that at least narrowed it down for me. And then I could determine, okay, what happened around that time, or maybe a certain day of the week. And so it might be, as simple as just looking for that pattern that usually tells us when, an area to focus on. So it could be as simple as during that specific time of day when we're seeing that cluster, well, that's about when somebody, that individual typically gets hungry. And so maybe they're looking for food, or they need to use the restroom, as Nancy mentioned, or they're tired during that time of day. And instead of just plugging along throughout their day, they might just need a break and be able to have a moment to rest. It's also important.
Sorry to interrupt, this is your 15-minute warning.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's also helpful to determine who's around when that behavioral expression is happening, or who's not around. So another trigger might be that. Sometimes it's associated with our approach as a care partner, or a specific visit from a family member that kind of increases frustration with that individual. So it's important to look at that. Nancy had shared with me a story the other day. It was a wonderful story of a woman that she worked with who found herself constantly apologizing to her husband for becoming impatient and then being frustrated with him. And when she would do that, he, because she felt so guilty and so upset with herself, he picked up on that. They both end up crying. They're both upset. What she decided to do, what she realized, was she was causing him now to be upset and sad, and that's not helping anybody. And so she reframed that in her mind, and she started saying, instead of, "I'm so sorry for treating you poorly or being so upset or frustrated with you," she started thanking him for being patient with her. And the way she framed it now is in a more positive light. He's feeling appreciated. And so it really just sets the tone for a nicer, happier experience altogether.
I will have to say that is probably one of the best aha moments I ever had from a support group participant whose husband had FTD. And that just touched me so much, just the whole idea of reframing. Super important. And
it's challenging to realize that you may be causing the behavior or the issue, the behavioral expression yourself. And so that's a tough one. But to be able to step back and look at that is an amazing skill set. And it's also important to consider whether or not a behavioral expression needs to be fixed. Is there really a problem here or not? I mean, there are times when the care partner might be frustrated because that individual with dementia is repetitively asking questions, or they're following that care partner around all day long, and they just, they feel like they're in their space, and that can absolutely be frustrating. That's not something really that you can change with dementia, and it's not really hurting anybody when you think of it along those lines. However, another example, if a woman becomes anxious and frustrated and upset every night after dinner as she's watching the news because she sees information about a hurricane happening in Louisiana, and she becomes frightened that's happening in her immediate environment, that is causing a problem. It is causing anxiety and worry and fear. And so that is something that would need to be addressed. So think about that as well.
So a couple of more things quickly through that we can cue into is to think about, is there a medical etiology? Is there something going on that's health related? I love this picture of this woman. It could mean a couple of different things. It could mean there's too much noise, there's too much confusion, too much of whatever going on. But let's think about a medical etiology. Does she have a headache? Is she dizzy? Is she constipated? I don't know about you guys, but none of us feel good if our intestinal tract is not working right. And so trying to stay, cued into that. Is it low oxygen levels? Is her blood pressure low? Is her blood pressure high? So think about your loved ones or your residents, if you're a professional. Think about what their health history is and look for a medical etiology. Could it be an environmental issue? Is there low lighting, as in this picture on the left? And so it feels like a black hole to them, or they can't find their way around. The gentleman up at the top covering his ears, is it too noisy? Is he crowded? What is he feeling, in the environment that's around him? And the picture on the bottom, is there too much clutter, too many obstacles, navigating around different pieces of furniture or toys on the floor or things like that could also play into it. So environmental issues we can look at.
And then it's also important to consider that person's individual story. We all have a story. And so what is it about that individual that could give us some clues as to what's causing this behavioral expression? And I ran an assisted living years ago in Maryland, in one of my memory care residents. I noticed during a meal one time, he would eat the majority of his meal, but then he was also saving a good chunk of his food in this small bowl on the side of his dinner plate. And I thought, what in the world is he doing? And I went up and I made sure he knew he could eat that, or was he not hungry, or did it not taste good? I'm asking him all these questions, and that wasn't the issue. So I just sat and watched for a little bit. And then at the end of the meal, he stood up and took his little bowl of food and went out into the courtyard and scattered that food all around the courtyard. And I was very curious as to why he would be doing this. And of course, as an assisted living administrator, I'm thinking, oh gosh, we're going to have all of these rodents and animals coming in to eat all of this food, or another resident's going to walk through here and slip because, there's some peas on the ground, or whatever it might be. And so I'm thinking, as far as risk and liability and all of these things, how do I fix this scenario? And then I realized, digging into his history, this gentleman actually was a pig farmer. And so most likely what he was doing is feeding the hogs at the end of his meal with his scraps. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to have him stop doing this, because that's who he is and that's his world. And so just brainstorming, I thought, how can I resolve this situation? Interestingly enough, I used to take my dog with me to work every day. And so what I just decided to do is, when he was done slopping the hogs, I would open the courtyard door and let my dog out, and he would clean up the food. And that was it. It was as simple as that. So this slide, we're not going to go through in the interest of time, but it's really just a good summary of everything that we've talked about. You have it in your slide deck as well, so you can refer to it again.
So let's think back to the exercise that I invited you to participate in at the beginning. Which methods that we've shared with you today could you use to improve communication with the person that you identified earlier? And what can you pay attention to in order to address the unmet need or unmet needs of that person to reduce challenging behavioral expressions? So I would invite you to just try one thing out of each area of communication, or looking at some of the expressions that you might have. So in closing, what we'd like to share with you is that you are not alone. There are community resources right at your fingertips that can help you and assist you in this journey as you care for loved ones with dementia or residents, if you're a professional, in facilities. Utah has 12 area agencies on aging. They are divided by county geographically throughout the state. This is available, area agencies on aging, best kept secret on the planet, I feel, and they are available nationwide. My favorite website to send people to is eldercare.acl.gov. And you can even leave the ACL out and it will still get there. And you will be able to find any area agency on aging. This is your taxpayer dollars at work. We are your public servants. And you put in your zip code or your city, state, and up pop your resources. And one of those resources is your State Division on Aging and all of the area agencies on aging that are in that state. So in your zip code, it'll take you straight to the one that you need to go to. So let's say you live in Tooele County. You can see on this map in front of you, we have an area agency on aging, fabulous one in Tooele County. All of our area agencies on aging are wonderful and have great resources. I'm just going to highlight briefly one of them that you see on the screen. And this is the program that I have had the privilege to be over for the state of Utah for several years, and am now passing that baton to one of my favorite colleagues and mentors, Kate Netterostic. So in the Utah Caregiver Support Program, we have 5 areas. One of our very first things that we focus on is making sure that you have information about community resources that are available to you. We assist you in getting to those resources and accessing them. For the general public, we also provide counseling, support groups, caregiver education, including dementia education. I am so pleased with the multitude of offerings of dementia caregiver education throughout our state. We have a variety of programs. Each AAA might offer some a little bit different from the other. All of them are absolutely fabulous. We have respite care that we can provide to caregivers with a stipend and a best friend for a year. It's a short-term program. And so it is not—
Sorry to interrupt, but we have 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you. So you have a stipend, you have a best friend called a social work case manager who will empower you in all things caregiving. For that year that you're on the program, our goal is to send you out better than you came to us, even if your loved one is continuing to decline. The types of things we provide with respite services could be whatever your greatest need is: personal care, homemaking, you need to get away and go have lunch with your friends or go to your own health-related appointments, things like that. It is catered to you. And we also provide supplemental services in the way of emergency response buttons, grab bars, things like that. And so it is based on caregiver stress. So I always tell my caregivers that call in, or care partners, this is not the time to be stoic. This is the time to tell it how it is so that we can help meet your needs.
Absolutely. And of course, you can't talk about dementia without mentioning the resources that the Alzheimer's Association offers. There's a couple websites here on the screen for you, and the best way to get in touch with them to access support groups, education programs, any other types of services and resources is to call their helpline, 1-800-272-3900.
And also available when this PowerPoint is posted on the Elder Justice website, you'll have our contact information here. Please don't hesitate to contact us. We love to share presentations, share information, and get you connected to services. So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a treat to share this information with you about a subject and a disease that we are absolutely passionate about helping care partners with.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that helpful and informative presentation. Um, that does take us to about 2:19.
Yep.
Um, so, okay, great. All right, so we have reached the end of this session of the Utah Elder Justice Conference. I want to thank you for attending the Conversations and Challenging Behaviors in Dementia Care, Which Part is Mine session, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.